Hey gang, thank you so much for joining me at 2 Texas Lobsters React. And today I've got a interesting video. It's called Characters from Ancient Mythology That Might Have Actually Existed. I've always been a fan of ancient mythology. Even in school, I just thought the monsters were cool and the stories were interesting, and today I'd like to share that with you. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get right on into it.
A legend is more than just a good story. It involves a larger-than-life hero doing deeds a little too fantastic to be real. But is there any truth behind these stories? The answer is a surprising kind of. Today, we're looking at some characters from ancient mythology that may have actually existed. But before we get started, make sure you subscribe to the Weird History YouTube channel. Then, head down to the comments and let us know what other mythological backstories we should uncover next. Okay, time to separate fact from fiction. King Arthur is the legendary king who saved the Britons from the Anglo-Saxons. He pulled a sword from a stone. He pulled another, more famous sword from a lake. And his tables had 0 edges. You've probably heard all these stories about King Arthur. But was he a real guy? Even though he doesn't appear in any contemporary historical sources, it turns out there is a solid amount of evidence that says a super powerful war leader, possibly named Arthur, lived during the 5th or 6th centuries. These aren't just shots in the dark either. Near Arthur's alleged birth site of Tintagel in Cornwall, a 6th century engraving by a guy named Artagnu was discovered. The engraving, found on a cliff above an area known as Merlin's Cave, seems to possibly make reference to the legendary king. In modern-day Colchester, archaeologists found what could have been the real-life round table, right in the spot where the capital of Camelot was supposed to be. Presumably, they think it's the real deal because someone engraved Lancelot into the wood next to a cool S. And what of the name Arthur? While the name may not be 100% confirmed, there is evidence of a British leader who went by Reothamus, a title that translates to High King. This person was likely the model for who we know as Arthur. You know King Midas from legends, or maybe from a series of muffler commercials from the 90s. Midas was the greedy king who wished that everything he touched would turn to gold. His wish was granted, but in true monkey's paw fashion, it immediately backfired on him. In some versions, Midas starves because all of his food and drink turns into gold the moment he touches it. In other versions, he accidentally turns his daughter into a hunk of shiny metal.
I heard that story.
You could probably still get some money for that. Either way, Midas's wish turned out to be a curse, and his legend serves as a cautionary tale. But according to Greek myth, several real ancient kings in Phrygia, Anatolia bore that epic name. The Lord of the Mushki in Assyrian legends, a guy dubbed Mida, may just be the Midas from the tales of old. The biggest tomb attributed to Mida, called Tumulus MM by archaeologists, was built in the 8th century and is over 160 feet high. We're pretty sure this massive monument belonged to either Mida or his grandfather, and contains tables, beer, and enough food to provide a massive afterlife banquet for all eternity. That sure does sound like a king with a proverbial golden touch. Among the spoils of the afterlife were several cups with remnants of ancient alcohol, some even identified and recreated in modern day.
While we're on the subject of recreating and modifying ancient foods, you might want to try Tasting History with Max Miller if you're interested in that sort of thing. He brings a spin to his videos that I really enjoy. He's an excellent speaker, unlike myself, who stumbles over every word I make. Tasting History with Max Miller does exactly that kind of thing. So check that out.
Robin Hood is the English folk hero who robbed from the rich and gave to the poor, and was also a fox sometimes. The Nottingham outlaw fought for the little guy by rebelling against King John's taxes, or so the story goes anyway. Was this tights-clad felon even real? In medieval England, Robahad, or Rabenhod, were typically names one would give to criminals, possibly inspired by a real-life Robin Hood. And medieval historians generally agree that Robin Hood probably existed. One modern theory suggests Robin Hood was actually a real-life felon named Roger Godbird. But his less than reputable actions don't fit the noble exploits of any Robin Hood we've ever heard about. In other words, he was the bad kind of thief. His cartoon fox counterpart would be wearing an eye patch. Paris, the Prince of Troy and wife-snatching bad boy from the Iliad. He's got a reputation for starting the Trojan War after he became so hypnotized by the beauty of Helen that he stole her away from her husband, the Spartan king Menelaus. The story of the Trojan War is one of the most enduring tales in Greek mythology. But did any of that stuff really happen? Was Paris a real-life troublemaker? Well, Troy was definitely a real place, located on the west coast of Anatolia in modern Turkey, though it may have also been known as Walusa during the Bronze Age. Somewhere around the 8th century BC, a treaty was signed between someone named Alexandru, which is strikingly similar to Prince Paris's second name, Alexander. References to this Alexandru living in and ruling Troy can be found throughout history, lending some credence to the idea that he was the inspiration for Paris. So, Paris probably did rule Troy, although whether or not he ever met anyone named Helen is up for debate. Still, it's a pretty good movie.
I never saw it. I don't know.
Paris wasn't the only Trojan who maybe existed. Turns out his father, King Priam, may have also been a legitimate ruler. During the late Bronze Age, the Hittites were reported to have run into some trouble with a guy named Pyramadu. If you say that name a bunch of times, or run it through a game of telephone, it kind of starts to sound like Priam. Pyramadu was a rebel who took over Troy and made himself warlord, but refused to pledge fealty to the Hittite king. Despite several attempts to capture him, it appears that Pyramadu ultimately escaped the Hittite king's wrath and became a legend in the process. King Arthur's magical advisor Merlin may sound like a far-fetched fairy tale. It's hard to believe that the most famous wizard in all of fiction could have any basis in reality, unless the legends were referring to his jazz piano skills, and not to a literal ability to do magic. Well, hold on to your pointy hat, because it turns out Merlin was at least partially based on a real-life person. Obviously, there are many fictional parts of the Merlin story. We're pretty sure he didn't have a talking owl and never turned any teenagers into squirrels. But some aspects of his life were based on the story of a man named Merlin or Merlin the Wild. Merlin was a poet who served a king who tragically perished on the battlefield. This caused Merlin to go mad and run off to live in the woods. If you've ever heard the phrase, "that person is as rich as Croesus," that means they're pretty well off, and you can probably convince them to invest in your cryptocurrency. In mythology, Croesus was a wealthy and powerful ruler who led his kingdom to ruin after misinterpreting a prediction from the Oracle of Delphi, who told him that his decision to attack a rival would destroy a great empire. Oops, should have read the room, Croesus. But what you may not realize is that Croesus was a real person who ruled Lydia in Anatolia during the 6th century BC. And, like in the myth, Croesus wasn't just rich, he was powerful too. His warlike people were supposedly the first to issue silver and gold coinage, and had conquered a number of Greek towns in what is now Turkey. Croesus started butting heads with a king named Cyrus, who was the grandson of his brother-in-law. Cyrus rose to the throne in Persia and began gathering power and influence that threatened Croesus's dominance. Croesus gathered up support to attack Persia, and just like in the story, his decision led to the utter destruction of his empire. But while he may have consulted the oracle to see whether he would win, which makes total sense, you want to be sure you're not doing all that war prep for nothing, he probably didn't get the dramatically ironic prediction he receives in mythology. If you're a fan of horror movies and/or set foot in a movie theater in 1999, odds are you've heard of Imhotep. Imhotep is the titular mummy from the classic 1932 Boris Karloff film and the 1999 Brendan Fraser reboot.
I love
In
those.
the films, he was a royal
like that
advisor
one,
in
too.
ancient Egypt who betrayed the pharaoh for love and was cursed for all eternity as a result. Hey, the heart does make us do foolish things, like take out a high-interest mortgage or get turned into a dusty walking corpse. But as unlikely as it may seem, Imhotep was actually a real person who was believed to have supernatural powers. Imhotep was the Egyptian pharaoh Zoser's right-hand man, serving as the king's architect, healer, and minister. It is even believed he assisted in building Zoser's famous step pyramid. Imhotep was a pretty...
Another thing about Imhotep was his ability to understand the human body and how it worked. I'm a registered nurse. You may remember that from some of my earlier videos. He did a lot of study on the way the human body worked and what was on the inside, and really, truly may actually be the real father of medicine. And maybe instead of the Hippocratic Oath, we should be taking the Imhotep Oath. I'm just saying, he was really the first one to delve in there to understand how we work.
popular guy who eventually became deified more than a millennium after he died. It was believed he was a divine doctor who could magically heal the sick. It's not clear why he was picked to be the inspiration for the villain of a horror franchise. Maybe the producers just liked his name. Gyges of Lydia was a 7th century BC Anatolian king who founded a dynasty and ruled over great prosperity in modern-day Turkey. The stories about him make him sound like a folk hero rather than a man who actually lived. For instance, Plato, the famed philosopher and all-around intelligent guy, believed Gyges possessed a magic ring. Pliny the Elder thought similarly and went on to claim he invented ball games. What, like billiards? Tennis? All the ball games? In actuality, the real-life Gyges was just an average conquering king. Once he took power in Lydia, he was able to make peace with the pharaoh of Egypt. However, he was eventually whacked by an invading rival. Sounds like he could have used that magic ring. Ancient legends called the Assyrian queen Semiramis the daughter of a goddess who seduced a king, which is a hell of a resume. She was responsible for the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the ancient wonders of the world, and also became a prominent ruler in her own right. As it turns out, some of that story is true. Semiramis is the Greek name for an actual 9th century BC Assyrian queen named Samuramat. She was married to King Shamshi-Adad V, and eventually became regent to her son, King Adad-Nirari III. So she didn't rule directly, but that doesn't mean she didn't wield a lot of power in her own right. Records from the time indicate that she acted as a political negotiator for her son, and she also made some pretty hefty donations to religious temples while she was queen, which could have something to do with her divine reputation. Always helps to grease the wheels a bit. So what do you think? Do you believe these people really existed, or are they just...
Wow, what a great video. I really enjoyed that. I hope you did too. And I just want to clarify something when talking about Imhotep and the Hippocratic Oath. Actually, doctors take the Hippocratic Oath, nurses take the Nightingale. Because I know someone will make a comment there, and I just wanted to clarify that. Another couple things, you may be seeing some thumbnails with the second lobster of two Texas Lobsters React. That's Misty, that's my wife. And I'm just trying some new thumbnails. So you will actually be meeting her in a few weeks when we react together. I'm on contract in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm going back home soon to Dallas, Texas. The other thing is, if I can remember, well, it slipped my mind. But please, if you haven't already subscribed to my video, like, share, comment below on things that you would like to see, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.